Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Thank you for joining us today for the first virtual TEDxUCMerced. Our goal today is to bring together bright minds to give talks that are idea-focused and on a wide range of subjects, to foster learning, inspiration, wonder, and provoke conversations that matter. As the first research university built in the 21st century, UC Merced is home to brilliant minds changing the world around us. We are a community of diverse students and faculty. We come from different places and have our own stories to tell, and we're here today to share these stories with the world. Without further ado, let's begin the program. Chris is currently a software engineer in the Bay Area. After graduating from UC Merced in computer science, he joined Workday to do mobile engineering and development. Now he works as a key engineer at a 10-person startup in Silicon Valley called Overflow, a technology company aiming to inspire the world to give by making it easy and smooth. UC Merced has helped build his entrepreneurial and technological spirit, so he hopes to continue giving back to his community.
If I were to ask you right now to picture your dream company that you'd like to work for in your career, what would it be? I find that most graduating students and alumni have similar answers. And if you're in tech, we usually hear about Apple, Google, or Tesla. In the finance world, we hear about Vanguard or Goldman Sachs. And of course, in biotech, we hear about Pfizer or Genentech. Huge companies who have established themselves as industry leaders. Why is it that we are drawn to these types of places? I believe as human beings, we end up conditioned to be drawn to the things that appear prestigious or exclusive or well established. I think for many of us it started with our parents or our mentors telling us to apply or be competitive for the top tier schools, the likes of Stanford, UC Berkeley, or even Harvard. And I can speak for myself that not many people were pushing me to pursue UC Merced as much as those other places. In fact, the summer before my freshman year, whenever I told someone, hey, I'm attending UC Merced, the question I always got back was, where's that? And trust me, it was way worse 7 years ago than it is today. And during my time here, I often called it a startup school because it was so small and new, yet it had a grand vision for what its future would be. And little did I know, the experience that I would have here would be so unique from other schools and ultimately shape me into who I am today. I wonder how many of you have also gone to UC Merced or also went to another smaller school and shared a similar experience. Can I be so bold as to say that for many of us students, alumni, and faculty here, that preconditioned mindset hasn't changed. As I speak to aspiring and growing doctors, scientists, engineers, business leaders, recruiters, and speakers, again, we're being encouraged to now work at that Ivy League company or Ivy League school. Now I want to clarify that there's nothing wrong with that. It makes a lot of sense and it has a ton of benefits. I get it. I spent the first 2 years of my career at Workday, which is a large technology company in the Bay Area, and I wouldn't trade that time for anything. It was such a blast. Instead, I want to shed some light that you could be passing up on some amazing opportunities if you are somebody who only looks to large companies. What if I told you that your best bet of jumpstarting your career and multiplying your potential and multiplying your impact in the world might not be at that large company, but instead at a startup or a small company? For those of you who don't know what a startup is typically a small company, usually brand new, but it has big visions and goals to reach a very large market and grow very quickly. It's literally starting up. And every large company that you know now today was once a startup. And they just found a way to add value to people's lives and then grow massively. And let me tell you, startups, man, they are the lifeblood of innovation. But guess what? They can also be the complete career hack that you might not have imagined for yourself. Having now worked in both environments, I can assure you that startups provide numerous benefits that large corporations usually aren't able to. And I'll talk about 5 specific points that really stick out to me. With the first one being that at startups, your career path will be accelerated. In large companies, you typically have things like software engineer 1 or entry-level sales. And then you usually have to work really hard for at least like 1 to 3 years to get to the next software engineer 2 or become a sales associate. In startups, these arbitrary separators don't exist. Everybody is a contributor and everybody is vital to the future of the company. I truly believe that 1 good year at a startup will be the equivalent career growth to 3 or 4 years at a large company. And after a couple years, if your startup is growing well, man, you would be well positioned to be an executive or senior leader in that company, or even another company. Which leads me to point number 2, which you're going to be given much more responsibility and thus a chance to make a huge impact for your company. Really what I mean is that you're going to learn so much and learn it so quickly. Reality is, large companies have so many layers of leadership and seniority that usually means you have to work your way up for a while, just in order to own and be trusted with that much responsibility. So that leads me to my third point, is that at a startup, you get to wear so many hats. And really what that means is that you get a chance to do a whole bunch of different kinds of jobs. And while that might seem intimidating to some people, it can actually really help build you into a well-rounded individual in your field. And if you're young or early in your career, perfect. There's no better time to experiment with different specialties than right now, when you're just fresh out the gates. Large companies will almost always hire you for a very specific specialty, and if you wanted to switch to a different specialty, you'd probably have to go through a whole layer of approvals and meetings just to make that happen. And the fourth benefit is my personal favorite, and that's you get to work directly and receive mentorship from people like the founders of the company, the CEO of the company, the board members of the company, and other company executives. There's a saying that you become more like the 5 people that you are with the most. So imagine being able to surround yourself with complete visionaries, risk takers, leaders, and field experts, the kinds of people who jump into these positions at startups. And at my startup, I talk to our head of technology almost every single day. And I like to joke to my parents that if I ever wanted a raise, I could go straight to the CEO. Large companies obviously have so many layers of leadership before you would ever get to such opportunities. And lastly, the 5th benefit is you get to be rich. And I'm talking filthy rich. I'm kidding, but I'm also not really kidding. There is a potential financial payout of working in early startups. Usually, early employees at startups are rewarded what's called equity, also known as shares of stock in the company. And if you get in early and your startup is fortunate enough to become even a quarter as big as Apple or Google, you could potentially gain a near life-changing amount of money. Now, disclaimer, I put this one last because I don't think it should be the primary reason for joining a startup, as it's never guaranteed, while everything I've said before this is pretty much guaranteed and way more valuable. So as I thought about these benefits, I couldn't help but see the resemblance of the UC Merced or the small college experience. Was this not a university that had big visions for its future, where as a student you were able to do things that you probably couldn't have done at the larger schools? Maybe it was the individual attention you received from professors, or the organization you got to start and grow that wasn't already there. I believe most of us already have that entrepreneurial startup spirit that this campus has gifted us. Now, I don't think it'd be fair to leave you without acknowledging at least some of the downsides of startups and working in startups. Startups are risky. Majority do fail within their first 2 to 5 years. You probably will have to settle for a lower salary in the early years of the startup, and you're pretty much gonna have to work more hours than other people at larger companies. But I believe for the right person, and chances are you probably are the right person, the benefits hugely outweigh the cost. And remember this, in hindsight, when you look back, a failed startup will never be wasted time, and the growth you take from it will be absolutely priceless. So, if I've convinced you a little bit of the benefits of working in a startup, I'll leave you with 3 tips that will help you begin your startup journey. My CEO and mentor at my current startup taught me a saying that life moves at the speed of relationships. You also might have heard that as your network is your net worth. Unlike large companies, startups typically can't spend a lot of time and money to go out and recruit you so easily. So, who you know and who knows you will be extra important for finding those startup opportunities. Always remember, whenever you meet somebody, anybody, you never know what that could eventually lead to down the road in your life. Second is become so good and determined that they can't ignore you. Startups need people who can execute and work quickly. And I know if you're a new grad, that might be a stretch. So that's why I personally added that determined part in there. If you can demonstrate your willingness to learn and grow in your craft so that you can tackle whatever the business needs, they will see you as an asset, guaranteed. Attitude will always be more important than aptitude. Master your attitude and your work ethic, and the skills will follow. And lastly, probably the most important one, find your life's mission. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, says you can either have a job, you can have a career, or you can have a calling. And it's so much better to have a calling. So find what you're passionate about and what you want to change in the world. And then find a team or a company who wants to do that same thing, or at least a similar thing. This is super important, and a lot of people skip over it and don't think about it. A startup is definitely a journey. It's a marathon. And that marathon could last a couple of years. So make sure you spend that time doing something that you truly care about. Because when you're doing and building something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. How good does that sound? So I'll end with this. The future is going to come from startups. Large companies, they're going to continue to do their thing and dominate for some time. But guess what? The innovations that we need now, the next American success stories, and the future dominant companies of tomorrow are going to be coming from the startups of today. As we see the world that we live in today, all the problems that we see happening all over the place: forests burning, diseases spreading, injustices and violence, mental health epidemics, you name it. We need more startups to come and grow to solve these problems. And guess what? They need you. They need your talent, your hard work, and your potential so much. It can provide so much help in these startups. And I know for you personally, because I've experienced this myself, it can be hard to resist the temptations of large companies. They can offer you a lot. But let me tell you, the future needs you in startups. So I hope I've encouraged you to consider being a part of this wave now, or at least some point in your career. Either joining a startup, or heck, even starting your own startup. After all, which side of history would you prefer to be on?
Tanya Golash-Boza is a professor of sociology at the University of California, Merced, the founder of the Racism, Capitalism, and the Law Lab, and the author of several books. Her scholarship helps us understand how racism and capitalism structure our lives and what we need to do to change this country and the world.
I want you to pull up in your mind's eye your neighborhood. Not just the buildings, the streets, the trees, but also the people. What do they look like? What race are they? Have you ever wondered why your neighborhood looks the way it does? Have you ever asked yourself why some neighborhoods are ravaged by drugs and violence and others are not? Have you ever wondered why neighborhoods that once had open-air drug markets now have upscale restaurants and farmers markets? I have, because each time I visit the neighborhood where I was raised, it has more and more upscale restaurants and fewer Black people. I grew up in a primarily Black middle-class neighborhood in Washington, D.C. called Petworth. Last time I was there, I ate in a restaurant whose specialty was raw hamachi with pomegranate sauce, preserved lemon, and satar. This was a far cry from the fried chicken wings with mumbo sauce my best friend Maralaka and I used to get from the Chinese carryout. When I was growing up in Petworth, there was no rustic pizzeria, no wine bar, no cider tasting room. And apart from my family, there were few white people. All this has changed. Petworth is gentrifying, which is when the gentry, middle-class people, move into a neighborhood that has low levels of public and private investment. Petworth has gentrified only because it first experienced disinvestment, which refers to the fact that Petworth lost public and private investment. You see, real estate developers built Petworth as an all-white neighborhood in the early 20th century. By the time my family moved to Petworth in 1976, nearly all the white people had left. Petworth was still middle class, but now it was primarily Black and experiencing disinvestment. When I enrolled in kindergarten in our neighborhood school in 1978, I was one of 2 white children at that school. The other white child, my brother Ian. When I was in 2nd grade, I transferred to a new school where there were only a handful of students who were not white. My new school had carpeting, a library full of books, and a beautiful playground. My old school had linoleum floors, a sparse library, and we spent recess walking single file around the block with our teacher. I spent the rest of my childhood taking the bus from my primarily Black neighborhood east of Rock Creek Park to primarily white schools west of the park. I'd get on the bus across the street from the corner store owned by Mr. Coe, where I used to buy Big Mama sausages. We'd ride past the liquor store, where Monique and I used to buy cigarettes for her grandmother and later for ourselves. Then we'd ride past the funeral home, where I attended Erica's funeral after she was gunned down in a drive-by shooting. On the other side of the park, there'd be houses on tree-lined streets and the occasional white person jogging. The bus didn't turn onto Connecticut Avenue, but if it did, it would have passed by the Politics and Prose bookstore, the bread and chocolate bakery, and the Parthenon Greek restaurant. One of my earliest memories is of going to a May Day march with my father and chanting, "Asian, Latin, black, and white, workers of the world unite," with activist parents. I grew up well aware of the harms caused by racism and capitalism. And you probably won't find it surprising to learn that I'm the founder of the Racism, Capitalism, and the Law Lab and a professor of sociology at the University of California, Merced, where I teach classes on race and racism. Despite my extensive anti-racist education, I didn't learn how racist policies had affected the neighborhood where I grew up until I came across the work of the historians at Prologue, DC. I learned that racial segregation in Petworth began with the use of racial deed covenants. These covenants are lines in deeds that read, "This home shall not be sold or rented to a Negro." The real estate industry and white homeowners used these covenants to prevent African Americans from moving into Petworth until 1948, when the Supreme Court ruled those covenants were not legally enforceable. With this court decision, Black people could move into Petworth. One of the first Black people to move into Petworth was a doctor by the name of Clarence D. Hinton. Dr. Hinton knew his white neighbors might try to prevent him from moving into this all-white neighborhood, so he found a white person to negotiate the sale on his behalf. Once the neighbors realized a Black family was moving in, they put padlocks on the doors to try to prevent the Hintons from moving in. This did not stop Dr. Hinton from moving his family into his new home. Within a generation, nearly all their white neighbors would leave. When a Black family moved into an all-white neighborhood, realtors perceived an opportunity for profit. Realtors used scare tactics to frighten white families to sell their homes and get out before the neighborhood turned. Realtors would then buy the homes and sell them to Black people for a handsome profit. This practice is called blockbusting. It happened across the city and created white flight. Between 1950 and 1970, half the white residents of DC left the city. As Black families were moving to Petworth, white families fled to the suburbs. The real estate industry and the federal government worked together to keep the suburbs white. The Federal Housing Administration advised banks not to grant loans in areas where African Americans lived, as these were not good investments. This practice is called redlining because areas where Black people live were shaded red on color-coded maps. Racial segregation was not an accident. It was a direct result of racially restrictive covenants, blockbusting, redlining, and white flight. The FHA's notion that investing in Black communities was a poor investment choice became a self-fulfilling prophecy. As the government divested from the city, so did the private sector. As white families moved to the suburbs, so did the jobs. By 1990, 2/3 of the jobs in the DC metropolitan area were in the suburbs. Half of all Black youth were unemployed. Enter crack cocaine. With high unemployment and failing schools, young men began to sell crack in open-air drug markets to make ends meet. Crack was lucrative. Turf wars and gun violence ensued. In 1991, Washington, D.C. had the highest homicide rate in the country. The city's response to this tragedy was to double the police force. By the end of the 20th century, Washington, D.C. had the highest incarceration rate in the world. The capital of the nation became a world leader in incarceration. This devastation touched the lives of my closest girlfriends, Monique, Maralaka, and Tracy. As children, Monique, her dog Brutus, and I spent our summers splashing in Rock Creek's cool waters. Monique's first love was Maurice. who lost his life to a gunshot wound. Every weekend in high school, I'd walk the 2 blocks from my house to Madalaka's home to get dressed, to go out to the Ibex, the Metro Club, or the Black Hole to hear one of DC's famed go-go bands. Her baby brother, Alo, always had something to say about our outfits, which were invariably short, tight, and colorful. It was the 80s after all. I didn't mind Alo's teasing, as he always teased us, as he did everything with a big old smile. Every memory I have of Alo is of him smiling. In my first year of graduate school, Alo was brutally murdered. Tracy was so proud of me when I went off to college. 2 years after I moved into the dorms, her brother Mark, who was the smartest and coolest dude I knew, was off to prison where he faced a life sentence. Monique sold her grandmother's home after she passed. Madalaka's family lost their 6-bedroom home to foreclosure. When Tracy's brother Mark was arrested, the federal government used asset forfeiture laws to seize the home Tracy's grandfather had purchased in the 1950s. The dispossession of Black middle-class residents made gentrification possible. It became profitable for investors to purchase devalued houses, foreclosed homes, and forfeited properties to create new homes for new people. Disinvestment, combined with low housing prices, record low interest rates, and tax incentives, made Petworth attractive to investors after decades of abandonment. Disinvestment made reinvestment profitable. In 2016, a real estate company ranked Petworth first in the nation for the profits investors could make from flipping a home, with an average profit of over $300,000 per sale. Reinvestment does not erase the violence of disinvestment. Are you ready for the 6-point policy plan that will? Unfortunately, there is no 6-point policy plan. There are no policies that can return the 4,000 lives lost to homicide in Washington, D.C. There are no policies that will return the human potential stolen from our neighborhood when the brightest minds were given life sentences for drug offenses. Today, most people I grew up with cannot afford to live in Petworth. They attended disinvested schools, which made graduating from high school difficult and finishing college even more challenging. The loss of their loved ones to homicide and the prison system made thriving in young adulthood difficult. There are exceptions, of course. Madalaka's youngest sister, Ezewine, is a doctor. She was able to turn the tragic loss of her brother into the motivation she needed to finish her medical degree. It took an unfathomable amount of strength for Ezewine to earn enough to be able to afford a home in Petworth. When I was growing up, nearly all the residents of Petworth were Black. Today, less than half are. When white people move in and Black people move out, housing prices go up. You know, there's one reason home values increase when white people move in: racism. There's one reason homes are assigned value at all: capitalism. Replacing carryouts with upscale restaurants does nothing to dismantle racism or capitalism. Dismantling racism and capitalism requires us to ask a new and different set of questions. Questions like, what if we invested in people instead of prisons? What if housing were a human right instead of a commodity? What if profits were no longer the driving force of our society? I invite you to join me and abolitionists like Angela Davis, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, and Miriam Kaba in imagining and building a movement for a world where young women like Ezewine can flourish without needing deep wells of resilience, where the potential of young Black men like Mark is not squandered, where lives like Alo's and Maurice's do not end in violence, a world where Black lives matter. Thank you.
Matthew Louie is an aspiring educator and an advocate for cultural diversity and better representation in education. Being of Cantonese Chamorro descent, Matthew understands the challenges of marginalized and underrepresented groups in society. He wants to help others use writing and food as platforms to find their voice so they can share their unique experiences and diverse perspectives.
As time moves forward, change is inevitable. What seems like a while ago now, we were all hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought about a big change for all of us. For myself, the pandemic resulted in a big change to one of my favorite things: food. Before the pandemic, I was truly unaware of how much food played a role in my life. From going out and eating my favorite dishes, to spending time with family and friends, I was now stuck inside hoping to one day go out and share a meal again. To make the most of my extended time inside, however, I took it upon myself to learn about my culture through cooking. As I cooked, I got to see my culture through a different lens. I started to appreciate all the effort it took to make the different dishes, and when I looked into the stories behind them, I learned that the people of Hong Kong and Guam also made the most out of change through food. So although not all problems can be solved by food, the adaptability of the people of Hong Kong and Guam showcase how food can be a tool to make the most out of change. The histories of Hong Kong and Guam are those both filled with colonization. The British controlled Hong Kong for over 150 years, and Guam was controlled by the Spanish and now remains a territory of the United States to this day. The result of these colonial powers coming in was a change to the lives of locals. What was once their indigenous culture was slowly transitioning or changing to look more like that of the colonial powers. And while some may have assimilated to make the most of this change, others worked hard to hold on to their tradition, and one way they did this was through food. Cha Chaan Tangs, or Hong Kong-style cafes, were born out of British rule of Hong Kong, as Western foods were too expensive for locals, thus were reserved for the upper class. To make Western foods more accessible, Cha Chaan Tangs served Western-inspired dishes while catering to local tastes. The result? Something uniquely Hong Kong. From baked pork chop rice, which combines a Hong Kong-style fried rice with a Western-style tomato sauce, to Hong Kong-style milk tea, which takes the Cantonese joy of drinking tea and adds a Western flair through the addition of milk, these changes showcase how the essence of Hong Kong was able to be maintained in a different form. In addition to making Western foods their own, the people of Hong Kong were also able to hold on to their traditions through food. Cha Chaan Tangs did not replace traditional meals like dim sum, rather they served two different purposes. Cha Chaan Tangs were a place where anyone can go grab a quick bite in a more casual Western dining experience, whereas dim sum paid homage to tradition as people gathered around a variety of small dishes and tea to enjoy something that was more than just a meal, but an event filled with cultural traditions. From the pouring of tea to the family-style layout, the Cantonese values of family, considering others before yourself, and enjoying food with others shines through. So although the British brought about change to Hong Kong, the people were able to overcome by making the food their own, as well as holding on to their traditional meals. And while Guam does not have a ubiquitous cafe like a Cha Chaan Teng, or a traditional meal or event like dim sum, food still showcases how the Chamorros were able to adapt and overcome to their long-standing history of colonization. From the Spanish, who brought more overt assimilation, such as laws preventing them from speaking their native language, to the more covert assimilation the Americans brought about, such as the importation and implementation of the U.S. school system, the Chamorros were heavily influenced by these colonial powers, and this can be reflected in some of their food. For example, one popular dish, Kelaguen, showcases both of these influences. Kelaguen is a chopped up meat dish marinated in lemon, grated coconut, as well as buni pepper. And while the influences are not immediately clear, there are still Spanish and American influences. The Spanish influences come in from the meat that was used, as many of the meats made into Kelaguen originated from the Spanish bringing them over during their time of colonization. The American influences come in the cooking process, as chicken Kelaguen is barbecued, very similar to American barbecue. Despite these influences, however, there are still Chamorro roots, as the use of coconut, an indigenous and important part of Chamorro life long before colonization, and the buni pepper, which is a popular pepper on Guam, are used in these dishes and hold those chamorro roots. So in both Hong Kong and Guam, food was changed because of the colonial powers coming in. But the indigenous people were able to hold on to their values, as many dishes still hold on to some root from before colonization. In addition, food, regardless of origin, highlights the Cantonese and Chamorro value of family, as people gathered around food to not only enjoy the amazing dishes, but also time with family and friends. So even though colonization brought about change to both Hong Kong and Guam, the people were able to adapt and overcome through food. So as we face change, let's adapt much like the people of Hong Kong and Guam, through food. When change makes us lose touch with who we are, let's engage in discussions about our cultural dishes to learn about the stories and the values they embody. When change prevents us from visiting our cultural homelands or spending time with family and friends, let's cook some dishes we share to enjoy and have a connection to them no matter the distance. When change makes it difficult to understand the people around us, let's share each other's dishes and learn about the stories behind them to better understand each other. Just no matter what, let's see food as more than just sustenance. Rather, let's see food as a way to adapt to any change.
Quinn is currently a political science major attending UC Merced. After graduating from UC Merced next December, he plans to pursue a master's degree in urban studies or transportation. After studying abroad in Germany, it changed his perspective on the way we travel as Americans when he saw the awe-inspiring public transportation networks, their care for the climate, and dense urban environments he never knew in small-town suburban America. Quinn envisions a new America with public transportation that rivals that of Europe and Asia, and where climate policy is at the forefront. UC Merced has helped build his interest in these policy areas and shaped his worldview forward and into the future.
I hope you all came ready today to answer questions for me and for yourself. My name is Quinn Griffith, and I am a fourth-year political science major at UC Merced. Speaking of UC Merced, thank you to TEDxUCMerced organizers for allowing me to speak to you today. Alright, so my first question is for all of you in the virtual audience. I really wish I could see how all of you are answering, but here we go. Let's assume that most of you, if not all of you, own your own automobile. Statistically speaking, approximately 8 out of 10 of you own a car. Some of you may own even more than one. In 2015, the average American household owned 1.8 cars. You probably know how many miles a year you tend to drive. Good. Well, did you know that the average American drives 13,476 miles, or 21,687 kilometers per year? On the other hand, the average European drives about 7,456 miles per year, or 12,000 kilometers. Knowing all of this, how many of you would substitute nearly 10% of your average yearly mileage by car for an alternative mode of transportation? If you're an average American, that would amount to around 1,300 miles. That's about 3.5 miles per day of the year. Well, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. Maybe if this was provided to you for free or low cost, you would consider it. Last question. Would you substitute 10% of your yearly miles by car for a free or low-cost electric bicycle, not to mention a tax credit for every year you manage to take 10% of your trips by e-bike? In Sweden, for example, the city of Gothenburg has offered free bikes to its citizens for 6 months who promise to get out of the car at least 3 times a week. When the 6 months is over, the city offers to sell the bike to the citizens at a discounted price. To me, they both sound like a sweet deal, e-bike or bike. I've always wanted an e-bike, but I've never been able to afford it. Let's face it, e-biking is expensive. A good e-bike starts at around $1,000 to $2,000, and a high-quality luxury one starts at around $5,000. But what if we could change that reality we all face? Every year, the transportation sector accounts for 28% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, and the typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. Imagine how many tons of carbon dioxide our atmosphere is choking on each year. Well, thankfully, there is action we can take to help change this. We can take to the streets a different way and change the way they look by riding e-bikes. So what are some of the reasons you should substitute some trips for an e-bike? Number 1, your health. They are not cheating, and they still count as exercise in a way you wouldn't expect. When I lived in Berlin, I frequently hailed e-bike sharing programs and rode across the city. Being a cold city, I still rode in the winter a lot, and I could still break a sweat if I pedaled hard enough and had a need for speed. A recent study published by the Transportation Research Interdisciplinary Perspectives Journal found that electric bike riders ended up slightly edging out pedal bike cyclists in terms of total exercise each week. The study notes that the health benefits of using e-bikes, especially when replacing car trips, should be factored in when considering subsidizing e-biking. Along with the physical health benefits, we all know that spending more time outdoors is good for our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. So even if you don't use a pedal assist bike, you can still reap many of the health benefits of e-biking. Number 2, supporting e-bikes props up a smaller sector of our economy and allows it to grow. As of 2019, electric bicycle sales accounted for 4% of nationwide bicycle sales. However, experts predict this number could grow exponentially within the next 5 years, hitting $23.8 billion in sales worldwide by 2025. Subsidizing the e-bike industry would pave the way for expanding bicycle infrastructure in the United States and beyond, allowing the fight against climate change to expand and progress to new heights. In addition, new demand for e-bikes and bicycle infrastructure would create thousands of jobs. According to market research firm NDP Group, electric bike sales jumped an astounding 91% from 2016 to 2017, and another 72% in the following year to reach 143 million nationwide. Not only this, but businesses across the country in big cities such as Domino's and several U.S. cities have expanded their pool of potential applicants by providing transportation to their hires with e-bikes, cutting down delivery times and giving economic opportunities to those who couldn't afford a car. Subsidizing e-bikes will give economic opportunities to those who wouldn't have had them before, decreasing inequality and improving people's quality of life. Additionally, survey studies have indicated that bike lanes, which would be part of subsidizing the e-bike, have a positive impact on local businesses. If not subsidizing individual purchase of e-bikes, governments can continue or start to invest in city-owned and operated bike systems, which a study conducted by the University of Pittsburgh has found helps to increase property values around where the bikes are stationed. Critical in this implementation, however, would be electrifying these bike systems that aren't already, so as to encourage the use of these bikes for commuting, taking cars off of our streets and helping the environment. That takes us to my proposal. As Americans, we love tax credits and abhor tax increases. Imagine you've received your government-subsidized e-bike, but you wonder how you can receive your tax benefit after replacing 10% of your trips by car with your e-bike. Well, we all have odometers in our cars, so why not add them to e-bikes? The simple process of adding this odometer would create more jobs in the private and public sector, as oversight would be needed. As taxes vary by state, region, and country, the specifics of this tax benefit would need to be sorted out by locality. But I believe it could be one of the e-bike incentives of the future to get people out of their cars and onto e-bikes. So, are you convinced? If not, let me give you 2 more reasons we should subsidize e-bikes. A third reason for us to support and subsidize e-bikes is for our environment and climate change. E-bikes are more sustainable than cars because they don't burn fuel and take less resources to manufacture and power. According to a study conducted by the European Cyclist Federation, e-bikes produce just 2.5 to 5 grams of carbon dioxide per mile, compared to an astounding 150 grams per mile for an electric car. Not only that, but according to National Geographic, motor vehicles produce more than 30% of carbon dioxide, 80% of carbon monoxide, and 50% of nitrous oxide emissions every year in the US. That essentially means if every American living within 5 miles of their work were to commute by e-bike at least once a week, it would be the equivalent of taking 1 million cars off of American roads. Additionally, bicycles, not just e-bikes, help to declog cities and make them more livable. Number 4. You waste countless hours of your life each year stuck in traffic, and how it affects your health. Not only that, but you've probably heard it time and again, how much traffic congestion costs us every year. In 2014, it cost the United States $160 billion. In the EU, it often costs around 1% of its GDP, or a comparable figure of $100 billion. These figures come from lost productivity, sales, and more. Last but not least, finding a parking spot won't be a problem with e-bikes, making you less stressed while also making the case for more green spaces in our cities by reducing parking. So what can we do now? Learn more about e-bikes. Show corporations that consumers are interested in e-bikes by searching about them, researching them, and maybe even by buying one if you've got the means. If there's something we all know, it's that money talks. Additionally, call or mail your local, regional, and nationwide representatives to let them know that the people want e-bikes. If we can prove to our governments that investing in e-bikes is the future, then it will be our future. And maybe, one day, your government will begin the e-biking revolution.
Jesica is a first-generation college student, double majoring in cognitive science and sociology. She's proudly representing her Guatemalan roots. Today, she talks of bridging the gap between social skills and technology.
Currently, I'm a fourth-year student, and I came to UC Merced with a declared major in computer science, computer science engineering. I've always been fascinated with technology. I've always really enjoyed playing around with my computer, seeing different aspects aside from changing the desktop webpage, right? Or changing the background color. In high school, I participated in the summer immersion program for Girls Who Code, as well as my computer science academy my school offered. And I also participated in Cyber Patriots. So there's always been that fascination of technology within me. And after some struggles with college adjusting as a first generation student, I actually had to switch majors. I switched from computer science engineering to sociology. Now, even when doing the switch and participating with different groups on campus, I was always asked, how is sociology connected to computer science in general, or what that was a giant leap, or all these misconceptions of both technology and sociology being worlds apart. So today I want to help bridge these two worlds together. And as I mentioned, I noticed a large gap between the two. I wanted to bridge that gap to help others understand that unity is best for innovation, right? We are growing in an age where technology is advancing rapidly. And with last year's occurrence, we learned that we need to advance with it as well, right? And so with COVID-19, we saw it at a grander scale. There's a term in sociology or human resources that's called technology fatigue. Now, technology fatigue has been now deemed as Zoom fatigue, as many of us have felt, which is a feeling of mental or physical overwhelmness, an emotional toll, honestly, after being hours and hours on the screen, doing meetings, doing classes. And so this, key term now, Zoom fatigue, it makes it harder to do an equal or greater amount of work since everything's online and many of us haven't used our computers more than just to, write a paper. I saw teachers struggle, students struggle, and we were able to notice the discrepancies within the school by how many have a laptop or internet. And Zoom fatigue actually affected a lot of businesses that aren't very tech-centered, that workers and employers who haven't usually spent that many hours on a computer. Now, for a developing team, the pandemic really didn't do much difference. The hours of coding can be done at home or in an office. And that's, once again, what I want to point in this talk. During my college years, I participated in an interdisciplinary org called the Q Project. We do events in the community of Merced, and we try to focus all these events in helping our children grow a passion for STEM education and STEM learning, as well as cyber hygiene and cyber education. Through this, I've learned I need every aspect of sociology in a tech environment. Students are grown to choose between the both, either social sciences or a tech education. And so I want to help change that. Instead of an or mindset, I want to help create an and mindset where we mix and unite both of these to create a more holistic student as well as a more holistic employer. Starting from higher education, we can create a more effective world by uniting both of these schools instead of having separate and division within each other. As a young woman, going in as a CSE declared major, it was easily noticeable the gender gap in technology. Programs such as Girls Who Code aim to close that gender gap through early exposure in high school. And these high school activities were my first introduction to technology that, of course, differed to the level of education needed for a college degree in computer science engineering. Now, when I participated in my classes, of course, I didn't see many like me. I'm a Latinx woman, and many of the times, few women that were there were from very different backgrounds than me. They were either financially fortunate or had gone into a computer science major because they have done computer camps or computer coding camps that allowed them to advance their education. This was another thing I lacked for my college education. And so, looking at these factors and other personal factors, I began questioning why I liked coding. I had the idea that tech is the way, ingrained in my aspiration for a better life and better resources. Moving to a social science major, I knew I didn't want to leave the technology world I grew to love, right? But here I also saw the discrepancies and the division between the School of Engineering and the School of Natural Sciences. And so this is where the idea of bridging the gap grew. I noticed my social sciences class stuck to a traditional way of teaching, where our computers were just used to turn in papers, to log on to Canvas, and so on. Even when going to Best Buy, you can see this division. After my computer had broken down, I went there to get a new computer. I was asked, "What's your major?" And as I answered, "I am a sociology major," the associate mentioned, "Well, then we'll just get you this more simplistic computer since all you need to do is just write and that's it." Once again, sociology, or at least in my case, sociology, use technology only as a medium instead of something we can create from. The only time light coding was presented in our classes was in a statistics class, where even then we can tell, or at least I could tell, the difficulty everyone was having when doing this light coding. Once again, because we stray away from technology and any of that type of resource. Sadly, in higher education for social sciences, we're only touching the bare minimum when we should be striving to go beyond that. And so I thought to myself during that one class, do I have to choose? Do I choose sociology or do I choose technology? Am I doing the right path by going through social sciences? Should I have stuck to technology? And so on. I realized that I shouldn't be choosing, rather integrating both of these and creating something better. There's still that stereotype of the lonely coder in some basement in a full dark room or something like that and just hacking away. But there's also that, mentality of a social science major partying, not really taking serious what's going on campus and just socializing. But when looking at giants in different industries, both tech and business wise, this is hardly the reality. Large businesses are looking at a holistic student or wanting to find a holistic student, one that's ready for work or a graduate program, ready to work with any type of coding or tech based jobs, all while having the ability to talk and present at different levels within the company. This is the core idea with a Google job interview. Technology is constantly changing, updating, and transforming the way we work. By staying in touch with my technology side through the Q project, I'm able to understand updates within technology as well as understand how tech project building works. This has allowed me to grow the ability of explaining certain terms that others might not be aware of. Take, for example, Raspberry Pi. Now, many of us, when hearing the word Raspberry Pi, we might actually think of a pie on a windowsill cooling off, ready to eat. But for the developing team, Raspberry Pi has a whole different definition. They visualize, most of the time, a credit card sized chip with infinite possibilities. This is an example of how understanding just the terminology and the process can help us advance different projects. And I've done this when presenting to the student body for the Q project. When doing so and presenting to them, with this understanding, there's a better communication between business and tech. In our case, funding and projects. An always growing field in technology focused on this concept is HCI, human-computer interaction. This field itself shows the need to understand social sciences and social behavior to produce a tech product that is able to be marketable, one, useful for our society, and serve best to the target population. As a friend and colleague of mine, Arman Kapoor, advocated in his published blog on RCSA, effective leaders are formatted at a young age, and this is done through early exposure. UC Merced's 2019-2020 data presents 28% of their student population electing an engineering major. Now, the entire school has boasted about being true representation of California's population, where we have about 55.5% of Hispanic students enrolled. And within those students that are enrolled, the majority is first generation. It is not new information that first generation Hispanic students are lacking in technology due to the scarce resources that we have in our communities. It's understanding that many of us tend to go for soft skills or advocation based education. And this is because we've been doing it for so long. We've been advocating for respect, acknowledgement, using communication skills to help represent our community. But trying to connect these skills to a tech-based platform can help us enhance our already known skills to a higher level, helping us establish financial security, as well as opening the door for other Hispanic youth who are trying to follow in our footsteps. We see technology advancing, And last year was a prime example for why we need to advance with it. Traditional lectures, traditional separation of schools are no longer fitting. Within our own school, we see that social sciences and engineering fight for funding, for time, for space. I ask that UC Merced leaders, students, and staff to help integrate both of these, to integrate social sciences and technology. I imagine and hope for a world with well-rounded employers emerging from UC Merced and fortifying within our community. Ones that can understand both the difficulties of a developing team, as well as the importance of community engagement and feedback. For Google to exist, a good HR or liaison is needed as the core, as well as for a small business or large business to survive. Cyber education is a priority. We need to unite and fortify these two, especially within our school, and help bridge that gap. Let's bring two worlds together.
Anna works as an IT analyst in local government, helping others connect to their full potential through creative information sharing. She developed a professional toolkit where she applies research principles from her academic experiences at UC Merced and self-study to resolve enterprise business challenges. Since UC Merced, Anna aims to create a resilient space to exchange ideas in service of improving organizational IT practices. Anna is an advocate for minority participation in IT careers and vocal about promoting empathy in the workplace.
Hello everyone, my name is Anna Zivanovic. I'm an alumna from UC Merced's class of 2015, and I'm very excited to be part of TEDxUCMerced's conference this year. My talk is about empathy in the workplace. I hope you find this helpful, while also some solace from a story you can relate to. Being an empath means that sometimes you'll cry at work. This talk is about making it your superpower. Before I begin, I want to put out a disclaimer. I'm an analyst in IT. What do I know about empathy? Turns out that being an analyst in IT means having tough conversations, sometimes introspective ones with yourself. I started out as an intern in IT with no direct experience, transferable skills, if you will. That meant my assignments were fast-paced, required quick turnaround times, and being in rooms with extremely experienced people. I felt overwhelmed, and it still happens sometimes. There was one time when I was struggling, and I was coming out of a meeting that resulted in conflicting assignments. A mentor stayed behind with me. I remember breaking down, bawling, "There's too many cooks in the kitchen," followed by, "I'm not cut out for this." They paused and said, "We're humans, not robots." They consoled me in a way I'd never thought of before. And that's the story I want to share with you. My journey in embracing empathy. What was I actually experiencing? Empaths can be sponges when it comes to people's stories and experiences. That meeting happened to be a very tough one. I don't actually remember what happened. But what I do know is that you might think empaths and this emotion is just in stories like books and movies, but it was happening to me in real life, and it happens at work. It's no surprise. It's mainly because the average person spends a third of their lives working or in some sort of work environment. We can't hit the pause button on our emotions. Doing what you love, loving what you do, it's rewarding, but it can also be draining. I thought of this as a weakness for quite a while, until I started looking for some positives and how to make it better. I leaned into it, and that's what I really recommend to you, or want for you to share with you, is ask yourself, what could I do with all these feelings? What I really wanted to do, and what some of you might be experiencing or experienced in the past, is connecting, wanting to connect with someone and staying connected. The reason for my feelings was really a disconnect. Days that I needed to get an assignment done, and what I started to do was bring in my favorite snack or bake something to share with everyone. I even connected with someone over toast. Now, I know there are real limitations working from home, but think about the ways that you can connect with others or stay connected. I don't have a solid answer. What I do recommend are virtual coffees, or just taking the time to reach out. What my mentor was saying is empathy sets us apart as humans. At a time when we're constantly automating our day-to-day lives, day-to-day tasks, empathy is at the heart of those innovations. Think about your favorite apps or services. It inspires our problem solving when we put people first. Whether it's end users or people part of that build process, in a way it enforces a shared purpose. It's especially important now through the uncertainty of the pandemic. It's important to talk about empathy because it helps promote work that is meaningful, with long-term benefits rather than short-term burnout. You might be feeling it now, studying, working from home. So what can you do about it? Find ways to connect the things you're studying and doing with your own pain points. You can start now or anytime, really. Empathy is all around us. It's present. It's in our past. It's in our future. What I mean by that is empathy is part of being present. Being in the moment, experiencing something with someone or something. Embracing empathy towards yourself and others is part of overcoming your past, whether individual or shared experiences. And finally, having empathy towards the future is part of embracing possibilities and continuous improvement. Problem solving with an opportunistic mindset. Are there any drawbacks of empathy? Yes, yes. It's a fairly new concept to apply in the work context. Our society tends to incentivize the outgoing and outspoken. It takes a lot of practice and grit to figure out how to leverage empathy effectively, but it's a skill worth developing. You'll feel like an imposter. You'll feel like a has-been. Now, those are one and the same. And I'll tell you how. You're comparing yourself to others, including your past self. And it's not your fault. We're programmed to do this. We are taught through school, through life, to train our minds in a way that we build our toolkit by comparing things we think are similar. But we are not similar. We're not similar to our past selves because experience makes us who we are today. We are also not the people we compared ourselves to because, again, we do not experience the same things or experience one event same way through the same lens. Improving the way we talk about ourselves is a step in the right direction. Again, we are not robots. Our unique experiences and characteristics are what make us human. So, how do you make it your superpower? Make room for yourself. Own your space. The journey to embracing empathy is long and the road less traveled, especially in school and the workplace. It requires you to grow and find yourself. But I'll tell you now it's worth it. And sometimes it takes a step back from what you're doing, a pause, in order to understand and communicate your needs. Finding your strengths, your weaknesses, and your toolkit, it's invaluable. Sometimes it's in the people you meet, the projects you work on, or sometimes even toast.
Christopher is a second-year PhD student in the Management of Complex Systems program within the Management of Innovation, Sustainability, and Technology department at UC Merced. His primary focus is on serving as a youth advocate to understand gamers and their behaviors with the goal of helping connect parents and teachers back to their kids. He's currently the vice president for the Merced Youth Soccer Association and CFO for 2 Merced small businesses founded by UC Merced alumni.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christopher Mikey Bernal, or Chaser00 on the League of Legends Rift, and I'm here to change your perspective on how gaming influences youth and popular culture and how you can be a part of it. Super quick introduction of myself. I completed my undergraduate studies here at UC Merced, securing my bachelor's in management and business economics and minoring in art and public health, which all contributed to my outlook on how important youth sports are for children. I started to see youth sports as one of the most important public health programs that not only keeps kids active and focused, but also provides a sense of community and mentorship, which is invaluable. I decided to dive deeper into this and my love for sports by pursuing a master's in sport management at the University of San Francisco. And while I gained a deep knowledge into the inner working of what makes a sport organization run and grow, it was the impact gaming and esports were having at the moment that caught my eye the most. Mainly due to the massive networks that were being developed and the shift that was happening right before our eyes as our youth continues to lean more towards modern digital competitive gaming or viewership than from traditional sports. Now I'm back at UC Merced and gaming more than ever, trying to understand the space at a deeper level as a PhD student in the Innovative Management of Complex Systems program. While this is digital talk, I will start by asking everyone to raise their hand if you know anyone who loves playing video games or spends the majority of the time gaming in any way. If you don't have your hand up yet, I want you to think about your own children or your friends' children or even yourselves or your brothers and sisters and how much gaming is interwoven into our lives. I'm sure if we were in a room, most people would raise their hand and come to realize that you are not an outlier. The number of global gamers is expected to surpass 3 billion by 2023, and most parents, educators, and even coaches struggle with understanding the relationships our society and youth have with the gaming industry as a whole. To ensure we are on the same page for the remainder of this talk, I will showcase the main drivers of gaming culture and how they overlap into behaviors. I will highlight sections of this graphic, none of which are actual game developers. Development of leagues, digital competition at the highest level draws eyes to the top talent, which is comparable to the early stages of NBA, NFL, and even MLB. Gaming organizations like 100 Thieves, FaZe Clan, TSM, and many more are all creating full rosters of teams for different gaming titles with loyal fan bases that look up to the players. Traditional teams and organizations like the Warriors in the Bay Area are deeply invested and interested in how gaming entertainment is being innovative and engaging audiences globally from a primarily digital position. Like any other business, securing capital is essential. And gaming organizations reinvest that capital into the top talent and leaders in each game. The power of streamers are undervalued from people who are involved in the gaming industry. We can compare loyalty and relationship between LeBron James, who has been recently asked to promote the COVID vaccine by medical professionals, because they know the power his word has within his fans. And Cristiano Ronaldo just hit 250 million followers on Instagram, the first human to hit that milestone. And these are just examples of traditional sports stars. When you look at top streamers on platforms like Twitch and YouTube Gaming, we can see that Valkyrie, Dr. Disrespect, Pokimane, XQC, Ninja, and even TSM Daquan, who has not even streamed in over a year, still has myself and his community hoping that once his personal situation are resolved, that he'll be ready to get back into the game. We can see similar levels of loyalty, and at times even deeper, since you actually get to know the streamers as a person when they are on camera for 3, 4, 5 hours straight. People don't really know LeBron or Cristiano, but they definitely know their favorite streamers and YouTubers in terms of how they treat their families, what they care about, how they react to the situation, and truly listen to what they have to say. When we look at players and gamers now, they have options around the clock to either play with their friends, build skills, or to watch the top talent competing in leagues, or be purely entertained by someone they love to watch on streaming platforms. Opportunities to consume content from people you feel connected to truly never ends. But now that we're on the same page about how we are visualizing the gaming industry, I can dive a little deeper into the massive misunderstandings of the power that being a voice in these environments can have to drive change and perspective, especially at the youth level. The conversation around youth being disengaged while at school is consistent, but it's not due to laziness. It's more lack of motivation and disconnection to the people who are in place to guide their learning. The research on the science of learning and development highlights that students have developmental needs for supportive relationships in the classroom and require challenging tasks that draw on their individual experiences and understandings. Gaming environments achieve many of those gaps that schools do not provide. Right? For parents and educators to build more supportive relationships, an increasingly important component is taking the time to become more culturally competent by understanding the space in which youth actually want to be in. Examples of what you can do to be involved are playing with them and becoming part of their space. At first, you will not enjoy the game. Nobody enjoys anything they aren't good at. But once you make enough effort and become competent, your child will notice that. You can also take a few minutes a day or a week to watch some of the streamers and YouTubers they like to watch, to learn about the language and little bits of the culture. You can also ask questions to understand what they're doing, but keep in mind how you are asking. They will sense authenticity or lack thereof. Lastly, showing respect for their passion or hobby is crucial. You would not want to work with someone or spend time with someone who did not respect the things you are passionate about. Neither does any child or teen. Lastly, showing respect for their passion and hobby is crucial. You would not want to work with or spend time with someone who did not respect the things you are passionate about. Neither does any child or teen. The gaming community is diverse, with endless variations in backgrounds and offering motivations for gaming, but what is mostly true is that gamers don't play games because they are easy, or because they like to be alone in their room. They are completing difficult tasks that build on their knowledge and skills that have been developed with the people that understand their goals and want to achieve them together. This can be friends from school or friends they met online in the space they are comfortable in. Parents and educators can become a part of this space and indirectly alter their children's behaviors by becoming the people our youth want to spend their time with. A lot of you watching are likely thinking, will it take time to accomplish this? Yes, 100%. But you will have much more bargaining power in the relationship from a standpoint of partnership and friendship, rather than from imposing your parenthood and authoritarian leadership on the household. I'm not saying everybody does, but imagine a world where our educators, coaches, and parents actually understand what is going on and we're a part of it. It's time to become a part of the gaming environment, and that will provide you the ear to more effectively share new opportunities, change your perspective on how to treat people, how to develop healthier eating habits, or even learn about climate change and how to do their part. Change behaviors at the youth level will provide much longer lasting impacts on our society and earth. Our youth need to know that the adults guiding them actually care about the things they are passionate about.
As we wrap up today's event, we want to thank you, the audience, for joining us today to watch these incredible talks. We would also like to thank each and every speaker for all the emotion, thought, and passion put into their talks. Today's event would not have been possible without you. We hope you walk away today with the inspiration to continue making an impact on your communities. Changing the future starts now, with you.